Awe, Amicus. While exploring the great wasteland of Fallout, players will engage with enemies through the game's combat system. While guns can deal with most enemies from afar, what about when a mutant closes the distance, or bullets run out? In such cases, the player will either be forced to run or engage in the ancient method of melee combat. This video will be the first in a new series I'll be making as we wait for Fallout 5. With hype growing and game reviewers salivating at the prospect of a new Fallout title, I thought it would be beneficial to look at how certain things have progressed from Fallout 1 through to Fallout 4. As we anticipate Fallout 5, it will be good to look at the progression so far so that we can accurately guess how things will turn out in Fallout 5, whether that be varieties of mutants, ghouls, or the progression of currency, or in this case, melee combat. Out of all the potential playstyles in Fallout games, melee-focused characters are by far one of the least played. This is most likely due to two main reasons. One, killing them over there while you're over here is generally an easier solution than letting an enemy within swinging range. And two, melee combat has never been the Fallout franchise's strongest or easiest playstyle. Today I would like to focus your attention on the latter issue, the Fallout series' lackluster melee combat. It is important to note early that I will not be focusing this video on perks. I am aware of many perks that increase the lethality of melee combat in each game, from perks like Blitz in Fallout 4 that close the distance through VATS, to perks like Slayer in Fallout 1 that make all hand-to-hand attacks critical hits. This video is focused on the mechanics of melee attack, the actual swinging, throwing, and punching itself. And with that out of the way, let's start where the series does. Beginning with Fallout 1 and 2, melee combat functions almost identically to that of gunplay. The only major difference is that your range with any given melee weapon is virtually non-existent. Gunplay was by no means the selling point of the first Fallout games, but melee is functionally guns with no range. Fallout 1 and 2 have minimalist attack animations and little attack diversity aside from positioning your character and the regulation of your action points. They really can't do much wrong in terms of this analysis, but go play them both. They're both fantastic games. There really is nothing to criticize about the original game's melee combat. The attack animations are fine. The killing animations are the exact same as the attack animations. I'd attribute this to the earlier games being more focused on the strategy of when and where to attack, instead of how you attack like in later entries. Melee combat in the first games functions about as good as was possible at the time for an isometric turn-based RPG. As for the variety of weapons, the early Fallout entries cannot be beat. These games featured a wide variety of objects that could be used as melee weapons, from the modest crowbar to the Fallout staple super sledge. Unfortunately, only a few of these items actually changed the playstyle of games. As with most games, the variety is more beneficial for role-playing purposes than actual levels of viability. But again, these were the beginnings of Fallout and built on 90s computer hardware, so they functioned perfectly well in their circumstance. The melee playthrough in the early games is still a very fun choice. The player can throw spears or knives at an approaching foe, then pummel them with fists or bash them with a nuclear-powered sledgehammer. All in all, melee is a viable playstyle, but not particularly fleshed out, which is why melee is best paired with explosives, especially in the older Fallout games. This is a trend we shall see continue throughout the games, and for good reason. Dealing splash damage at a distance with a grenade and then closing the gap to hack your enemies as they are recovering is your best bet. It's one of my favorite playstyles for the early games, though not as easy as a straightforward big guns and energy weapon playthrough. Now, enough about the genesis of Fallout, because without including perks, there really isn't much to say about them regarding melee combat. On to the 3D titles. Moving on to Bethesda's Fallout 3 and Obsidian's Fallout New Vegas. Let me apologize for lacking footage beforehand. I have no means of capturing footage of Fallout 3 as I still play it on my old PS3. Steam's Fallout 3 refused to ever open after downloading, so for the time being, I'll show Fallout New Vegas combat exclusively. In both games, using melee is underwhelming, and I dare say lackluster. They just dumbed down Oblivion's melee combat and used it for Fallout 3. Since Fallout 3 was created by many of the same devs as Oblivion, the reason for doing so is fairly straightforward. They used what they knew. Fallout New Vegas was created using the same engine and template as Fallout 3, and so the melee just carried over. I cannot fault New Vegas for this, as the devs were incredibly rushed, and redesigning an entire mode of combat probably would have fallen under non-essential for the game's release. However, Fallout 3 has less of an excuse for starting this trend, and Fallout New Vegas did improve it slightly. In Oblivion, a player could swing their sword as many times as they wanted. They could also hold down the attack button to initiate a strong attack. It wasn't complicated, but it worked. The key to Oblivion combat was the stamina bar. Every attack, jump, or power attack consumed stamina. The damage dealt to the enemy was calculated based on the amount of stamina in the player's bar and the level of their skill. This was a great way of simulating fatigue. The player couldn't swing wildly until the enemy was dead without losing their energy and needing to rest. When the player's stamina had run out, their attacks would be doing considerably less damage, and the player was much more likely to be knocked down by an opponent. The player could regulate their stamina by carefully timing their attacks or using a fortify stamina potion or spell. Walking instead of running was another choice the player could make to help their odds, as stamina regenerates faster at the cost of movement speed. All of this to say, Oblivion's melee combat functioned very well with all of these penalties and limitations. Fallout 3's melee gives the player two options: R1 for a light attack that can be spammed ad infinitum, and holding down R1 for a heavy attack. While adapting the character models from swinging axes and maces to pipes and pool cues, they removed the element of stamina control from the combat. The only stamina drain in Fallout 3's combat is through VATS. Heavy attacks do not drain stamina, which just leaves them as a strange, unnecessary, less effective option in case you want a cooler looking attack. This was a considerable downgrade. Considering heavy attacks rarely stun enemies, have longer attack animations, they are an overall net negative. The player could be doing more damage and using less resources by simply spamming R1 until their enemy's health pool reaches 0. Without a resource like stamina to manage, and light attacks being the undisputed best option, this leaves melee combat feeling very shallow and repetitive. It even lacks the ranged combat engagement of aiming at an enemy as they close the distance, trying to make your shot. For melee, you just bum rush the enemy, face their direction, and click R1 until completion. Or in the case of a few weapons like the Ripper, face the enemy and hold R1. Fallout New Vegas improved upon its predecessor by reintroducing throwing weapons like the original Fallouts had. Throwing spears, knives, and axes adds some much-needed variety to the melee playstyle. This genre of weapon was surprisingly absent from Fallout 3, to the detriment of melee builds. These weapons give a player ranged options to damage the enemy before they can close the distance. It's a great facet of strength builds and should obviously be included. In both games, pairing melee builds with the explosive skill is also a great choice. Both games lack the throwing skill from the original Fallouts. Instead of being a unique skill, its properties were split between melee weapons and the explosive skill. Fallout New Vegas shows signs of this, as some perks to throw farther and faster require levels in both melee weapons and explosive weapons, respectively. Perks aside, grenades and machetes is a classic Vietnam tactic for when bullets run out. The weapon variety found in these two games is on a similar level. Fallout New Vegas has many more weapons to choose from, but many of these are unique reskins of existing weapons. Therefore, uniques, but adding fire or poison to a knife is still just a knife. It is important to note that adding more weapons isn't always better. See Dark Souls 3 for reference. But it is appreciated. The biggest difference between Fallout 3 and New Vegas is the addition of throwing weapons. In this case, Fallout New Vegas' melee combat surpasses Fallout 3's. Throwing spears are badass and should be in every Fallout game. On the topic of spears, I must ask, Bethesda, what the fuck? I swear this company has a personal vendetta against spears for no fucking reason. Oblivion, Skyrim, Fallout 3, and 4 all lack spears. It's the most basic weapon to exist right after clubs. Cavemen whacked stuff and then discovered they could stab stuff. Why keep all variants of maces and clubs but remove spears altogether? At least Fallout New Vegas had throwing spears, but come on. What are we doing here? Moving on. Next, we will be discussing Fallout 4's melee combat. It should be no surprise to anybody that the game I will take the most issue with in regards to melee combat is Fallout 4. Mostly because it was released in 2015, where graphics, mechanics, and gameplay functionality had improved drastically compared to its predecessors. Saying the gunplay of Fallout 4 is good is an understatement. It is fun, engaging, satisfying, and functions realistically. Aside from the appalling lack of weapon variety, Fallout 4 drastically improved gunplay in every other aspect. So why didn't they improve the melee gameplay? The moveset for each melee weapon is about as mediocre as it gets. You swing your machete left, then right, then left, then right. Congratulations, that's about as complicated as it gets. The moveset for any given melee weapon in Fallout 4 is abysmal. You have regular light attacks that can be spammed infinitely, then you have heavy attacks that require action points for a minimally stronger attack. There are running attacks and a few directional attacks. However, all of these are bland and ineffective compared to spamming light attacks. Not to mention the lack of jumping attacks, but we will get to that. This game released in 2015. So let's look at a few games that were released prior that had more engaging, more dynamic, and more satisfying melee combat. Because there honestly is no excuse for how fucking boring and stale the state of melee animations are in Fallout 4. I've seen some folks online defending the melee in these games with an argument like, it's just swinging a sword. How complicated do you need it to be? My hope is that after these examples, you'll see how interesting just swinging a weapon can be. It's all about the execution. Let's start with a personal favorite, Dark Souls. Now, this game has been sucked off by about every YouTube gaming channel yet to date, so I won't embellish on what a great game it is. We are going to be specifically looking at the versatility each weapon gives the player. Using a longsword in Dark Souls gives you a surprising amount of move variety. You have the typical light and strong attacks. These can be paired together for interesting combos. Also available are jumping attacks and dodging attacks. Nothing too incredible so far, right? But what about when you press triangle? Oh my, did we just switch to using two hands for one weapon? Now we have all of the same attack options as before, but with two hands, the moveset for each available attack has changed completely. Now we can attack with more force. The animations are slightly slower, but deal more damage and pack a heavier punch. In many cases, this decreases the range of a given weapon, so there is a trade-off for stronger attacks but reduced range. Having this feature in the game doubles the available choices for any weapon's moveset. It allows players much more freedom with how they want to play their character. Switching between one hand and two, depending on the specific situations, is one of the best elements of Dark Souls combat. Another great element that was widely popularized by the Souls series is parries. Parrying is a high-risk, high-reward style of combat. By parrying, you forego the option to block an incoming attack. If your timing is off, be prepared to take full damage for your mistake. However, if timed correctly, the game will allow you to riposte said attack for a critical hit. This is not only extremely satisfying, but adds yet another option for enemies, to be used at the player's discretion. Another game with fantastic melee combat that was released years before Fallout 4 is Dragon's Dogma. This game may be the pinnacle of melee combat versatility. While this game excludes the option to switch between one-handing and two-handing a weapon, the moveset variety is truly god tier. There are light attack chains and heavy attack chains. We have jumping light attacks and jumping heavy attacks. There are unique combos depending on when the player presses the attack button. If you spam light attacks, you'll just spam light attacks. But if you light attack once, then pause, then spam light attack at exactly the right time, you'll have a different light attack combo than if you had just kept pressing attack. If you hold down heavy attack, you'll initiate a heavy attack combo, different from if you had spammed heavy attack. Not to mention sprinting attacks and parries. These can all be chained together in any order to create one of the most engaging combat systems I've ever seen. Now, I hope I've shown that melee combat doesn't have to just be swinging a sword left then right on repeat for each encounter. These two examples show how intricate and engaging using a sword, or any melee weapon for that matter, can be when it's crafted with care and player choice in mind. Fallout 4's melee movesets are the bottom of the barrel mediocrity. It's the most minimalist melee combat system I've ever seen. Now enough about the movesets, on to dual wielding. One of the most shocking things to be absent from Fallout 4 is dual wielding. One of the best improvements Bethesda has made to any of their games was the addition of dual wielding in Skyrim. Being able to use your left and right hands independently opens up a plethora of interesting tactics for combat. Being able to use a spell in the left hand and a weapon in the right is nothing but an improvement from the older games. It doubles playstyle diversity and build variety. Why wouldn't they include it in Fallout 4? I really cannot think of a single reason why it wouldn't be there. They copied so much from Skyrim, but somehow missed out on one of the few improvements Skyrim made to the Elder Scrolls series. We could have been able to dual-wield machetes, or had a pistol and a combat knife. Maybe they could have made special stats actually do something in Fallout 4, and have stat requirements for certain gear, similar to how Dark Souls' weapons work. I would reference the older Fallout games that had this feature, but I think at this point people would understand the Dark Souls reference more so than referencing previous games in this series. Let's say you need 5 strength and 4 perception to be able to use an M4 carbine in Fallout. Maybe you can use it without those stats, but there will be more bullet spread and the gun will sway slightly, impeding your ability to aim accurately. Well, when the player has leveled up to have 10 strength and 8 perception, why not allow them to dual-wield carbines? Maybe at 10 strength the player could wield 2 super sledges and play as a junky berserker build. What assassin in Fallout wouldn't want a silenced 9mm and a knife when infiltrating an enemy base? Or a laser pistol and a ripper for close combat mercenary builds? Dual-wielding revolvers for a Western gunslinger build. Oh shit, I see a bunch of ghouls up ahead. Let me dual-wield my sawn-off shotguns and live out my zombie apocalypse fantasies. I just think of all the interesting combinations I would love to try out and ask myself, what reason could they have had for not implementing this? I sincerely want to know if any Fallout players would be against this idea, because I think this is something they should have already implemented, and I'm shocked it was absent from Fallout 4 in the first place. Now, I could understand them having more issues doing this for guns, but for melee weapons, I cannot find a single reason, aside from laziness, that they wouldn't have done this already. They already have the dual-wielding animations in Skyrim. They've had them for 6 years before Fallout 4 released. It's not as if only having one melee weapon in the older Fallouts was an important feature of the game. It was simply engine and gameplay limitations of the time. Being able to use your left and right hand independent of each other is a strictly positive improvement in gaming. If not that, then one- and two-handing weapons like in Dark Souls. At least this option could open up the possibilities for a wider moveset for any given weapon. I mean, what is the character's left hand doing when they wield a machete? Oh, that's right, it's just hanging on the left, being useless. No shield, no second weapon, no stim pack, not even the ability to throw a left hook for a stun before stabbing them with the right. Now, I know the stat requirements for weapons is wishful thinking on my part, but the dual wielding is something I can say with absolute certainty should have been in the game. Even Bethesda stans would have to concede this point. The final topic for Fallout 4's melee is weapon variety. We've discussed how lackluster actually using melee weapons is, but is there at least a large number of options to make up for this? No, there is not. Fallout 4 followed the Elder Scrolls trend. Honestly, it's a Bethesda trend at this point, of reducing the weapon pool with each consecutive game release. Morrowind's weapon pool was amazing. Oblivion cut that number in half, and Skyrim cut that number down even further. Bethesda continued this trend with Fallout as soon as they purchased the IP. Fallout 2 had a fantastic pool of weapons, more than Fallout 1 because, sequels are supposed to improve on their predecessors. Now, according to a 6-year-old Reddit thread, which I trust completely, Fallout 3 had 134 weapons total, Fallout New Vegas had 235 weapons total, and Fallout 4 had 186 weapons total. However, the numbers for Fallout 4 start to get fuckety because of the amount of variations each weapon has. Because almost any weapon in Fallout 4 can be any weapon depending on what modifications are made to it, which of course leaves late-game weapon choices in a bad spot. Because when everything can be a sniper, automatic, or semi-auto rifle, there will objectively be a best model for each gun variant. Now, this script is teetering on divulging into a discussion on weapon mods in Fallout 4, which I consider to be an abomination of weapon variety, but lucky for me, the melee weapons are the least affected by the new weapon mod system. Every upgrade is just, do you want it with spikes or with healing coils, or something else stuck onto the edge of the weapon? This doesn't affect playstyle any further than the base damage in most cases. The point remains that the weapon pool for Fallout 4 is pitifully small. On paper, there is an incredible variety given by weapon mods, but where melee weapons are concerned, this distinction is null and void. 5 flavors of the same baseball bat does not make up for lacking crowbars, spears, throwing knives, cattle prods, chainsaws, katanas, golf clubs, bumper swords, throwing axes, razor blades, or thermic lances. Just to name a few that I miss in particular. And one more note on the weapon variety. I must ask, what the fuck is this? The pool cue can literally be turned into a spear through weapon modification system, but it doesn't thrust? You literally let us make a spear, but leave it with the baseball bat moveset. Come on, Bethesda, this has to be a joke. This really feels like a fuck you from Bethesda. But at this point, I'm attributing about 99% of their choices to incompetence and nothing more. It is also important to mention that Fallout 4's melee combat is objectively worse in third person. I prefer to play in third person because I like to see my cool character doing the cool things, but in Fallout 4, it impairs third person gameplay more often than most people realize. In third person, your melee attacks are actually slower. When trying to swing wildly in third person, the recovery animations are longer for some reason. Meaning if you get pinned, like I did in this clip, You'll be stun locked indefinitely until you switch to first person to spam attacks. Also, the bash with guns is affected by this. When using a bayonet, the player should thrust their gun forward, because bayonets essentially convert your gun into a short spear. But in third person, the character only does the elbow bash, completely ignoring the bayonet on the end of his gun. Nice, Bethesda. In summary, melee combat hasn't been Fallout's strong suit no matter the game in question. So what can we expect from Fallout 5? Well, given Bethesda's track record, I assume we will see the exact same quantity of weapon types available, if not less. You'll have your basic baseball bat, power fist, super sledge, and a pipe. I doubt they'll add in spears or fundamentally alter the way melee combat operates. It will most likely be the same light attacks, heavy attacks, and VATS attacks. They might implement throwing weapons again, but I doubt it. Dual wielding should be a necessity for Fallout 5, with both guns and melee weapons. If not rifles or SMGs, then at least pistols and one-handed melee weapons. I hope to see a wider variety of moves for melee weapons. Hopefully a baseball bat attack is different from an axe attack, is different from a pool cue attack, but we will see. After they declared that show canon and retconned half the canon in the show, my hopes are not high for Fallout 5. But that's all I have to say on melee weapons for the time being. Now, before I wrap up, I have a few points for anyone who made it this far. First is the fact that I will not be covering the Fallout TV show in depth. I was planning on it, but I have decided not to for several reasons. The main reason is that I do not like the show, and I don't want to subject myself to a minimum of 8 hours of garbage content to dissect. I've seen some other YouTubers doing exactly that, and I don't feel the need to. I mean, I have a job like all of you. I have limited free time. I don't want to spend it dissecting that garbage show. Instead, I'm going to continue with my previous plan of making videos like this. I've finished dissecting the things I wanted to dissect from Fallout 4, and now I'd like to move on to broader topics, making a series of videos covering topics like weapons, mutants, and factions, and how they have fundamentally changed over the games. Not exclusively lore dumps and explanations of retcons, but an overview with a focus on mechanics and lore and overall gameplay improvements or downgrades. And also branching out to other games. Fallout is my favorite franchise, along with Dark Souls of course, but I'd like to branch out, because I've played a lot of games, and there are a lot of good ones out there I'd like to cover. Let me know what you think in the comments. And with that, Wale Amicus.